again.
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely. So my name is Kendra Napick. I am the president of the Vermont Grape and Wine Council. And I also own and founded Ellison Estate Vineyard, which is a vineyard in Grand Isle. And my husband and I took it over just over 5 years ago. I'm actually a veterinarian by trade, so have experience in agriculture, but definitely recently kind of changed my career path. It's an exciting time, I think, for Vermont wine, the Vermont Grape and Wine Council was pretty inactive for the last 5 or so years. And in the mid 90s, late 90s, it was a pretty active organization. Some of the largest vineyards that exist in the state were built then, which are tiny in comparison to the rest of the world and the rest of our country. But it was a pretty active organization, and for various reasons went through this period of inactivity, which COVID did not help at all, obviously. But there's kind of a second wave, a second generation of winemakers and wine growers in our state with a lot of renewed energy. And so the council has recently come back together. So Deirdre Heekin and David Keck are both also on the board of directors of the council as well. So Deirdre's the vice president and David is our legislative chair. And yeah, so there's kind of this new wave. Yeah, here, show you. No, we're just, so this,
we're excited to be here to talk to you all. I'm Deirdre Heekin. My husband and I own a winery called La Garotista. We were in the restaurant sector for about 20 years. He's a chef, I was the wine director, and through that, we began farming for our restaurant, and somewhere along the line, I decided I wanted to grow wine, and we started to focus on that. And in 2010, we opened our winery, and we were farming 4 different parcels of vines, 2 in the Champlain Valley, 2 in the mountains in Barnard, down in Barnard, which is where the winery is. And yeah, we've been passionate about sharing Vermont wine with not only Vermonters, but the outside world. We're currently distributed in several places within the United States, but we've also been really lucky to be able to ship some wine out to Europe. So we're in the UK, we're in Ireland, Italy, Spain, Germany, Austria. We're also in Quebec and Mexico.
Congratulations.
And we're really tiny, so we make about 100 cases a year. So it's not a lot of wine going to those places, but
still,
we feel, thank you. We feel really strongly that what we're doing here in Vermont is important to share with the wider wine community and wider agricultural community, especially with the kind of varieties that we grow here. And what that means for wine growers internationally in a really challenging climactic period that we're in. Yeah. So that's been a real focus for us.
So David Keck, and I lease the vineyards at Boyden and make Stella 14 wines, and moved back to Vermont in 2020. I grew up here and moved back in March of 2020. As the pandemic began, and started pruning with Deirdre and took over the vineyard when Dave Boyden decided to lease that out, and have been making a small amount of wine there ever since. But I cut you off in the middle of you were on a tear, and I just wanted to introduce Deirdre before we.
No, your position is great.
So everything did you get to meet all of us? Or Brian, you haven't met Brian.
Brian Campbell, Bennington County.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
He's a chicken farmer.
Don't listen to anything. Well, you can listen to 99% of what the chair says.
His farm just grew from 5 chickens.
Exactly.
But anyways, welcome to the Ag Committee, and we'll listen to your presentation, and then we'll have questions, or maybe we'll have questions as you go through.
Sure, but I mean, it's not a super long presentation, and I think pretty simple beginning, but really grateful for the time and quick overview, just kind of what we were hoping to cover in the presentation, the sort of current state of where we are with grape growing and wine making in Vermont. Quick discussion of tax and tourism, kind of the financial opportunities that exist within Vermont, as well as a little bit outside the state. Chat about some of the claim and kind of the demand for what we're doing, and what we grow, how we grow, why we grow here, and some of the sort of value-added product benefits that come along with that. And then I guess the challenges and opportunities, which is probably why we're here. Foremost. Little Frontenac Blanc photo there. So the current state, we currently have about 170 acres planted. So kind of a smallish dairy farm size, I guess. They're about 28, and all of this I say around and about because we're still kind of in the process of getting back into gathering data points and information around the state. There are a lot of people who put in small vineyards in their backyards and things like that. So trying to really sort of separate what is commercial versus what is sort of hobbyist. There is a strong focus, and I've got two of the strongest proponents on either flanking me right now for organic, regenerative, and biodynamic farming. So that's a huge through line in a lot of the farming that's going on with respect to grapes in the state. And I know that both of these lovely people will speak more to that, I think, as we move. But it's really, really important, I think, for the ethos of what we do. Really quickly, I'm curious whether there's a statistic, and I've been kind of piling through state information. A 10-acre plot in the state of Vermont, what is the average agricultural sort of financial gain from that plot? Is there any sort of data or what an acre is worth with respect to what that yields financially for a farmer in the state of Vermont?
It varies, like if you're growing corn, kelp.
Yeah.
You can do 30 tons, say, to the acre.
Yeah.
It's so much an acre. If you're growing hay, you get 3 ton maybe to the acre.
Yeah.
So we do have those numbers, but we don't. I guess if you sold.
It's hard to look at revenue, I guess, when a lot of farmers are using that for their own livestock.
Yeah, so we don't have like you have 21 million up there, and that must be in gross revenue.
So that's actually that's tax put back into the economy. So basically that's looking at, and we can talk, I was curious on acreage, because we're going to get to what kind of grapes look like when you invest in an acre or 10 acres of grapes. And I was just curious, sort of starting the conversation.
Strawberries, they'll do well over maybe $4,000 an acre, something like that. And we have all those numbers, but I don't know how accurate they are.
Sure.
They're.
We'll continue the conversation, and I'm just out of curiosity, especially when speaking with folks in other forms of agriculture. These numbers are pulled from a Wine America study that was done in 2022. They went state by state, as there are 50 states that produce wine currently. And I was curious where Vermont stacked up with respect to the actual financials. So right now there are 8.15 billion tax dollars in state and local taxes, and those are consumption taxes, which account for state and local sales taxes, as well as any excise taxes that apply to specific retail. Of that, Vermont is 0.25% at 21.3 million. There are $16.7 billion in tourist expenditures in the wine industry right now in the country, and of that, Vermont is 0.005% of the national total. We currently garner less money per, I guess, capita than any state other than Hawaii, North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Mississippi, and Rhode Island and Delaware. That list is only important when you consider the fact that most of those states don't actually have any wineries, and we are surpassed in tourist dollars by a number of states that don't have a single winery in the state. So there's a lot of potential for growth in that part of the industry. It's a nice picture of it.
So the 21 million, is that, when you're telling us, is that all offering wine? Is that just the local wines? What are?
So this is from wines produced in the state of Vermont.
Sold commercially.
Sold commercially, as I understand it, but again, we've got good contacts and our members of Wine America. Some of this data I think is pretty outdated, and I know that it's 2022, but I also know that we've not been active in getting them numbers back. So a lot of that is kind of them gathering on their own.
So that 21.3 million, that is just any wine being sold, liquor store.
As I understand it, that is, yes. But
Seems high.
it does seem super high to me.
but
It's,
looking at
you know,
that.
the fact that it's 0.25% of the national total with consumption being what it is in the state. Anyway, I'd like to dig deeper into these numbers because this is only a fraction of sort of what they told in their survey. And I just pulled those two numbers for reference, but the survey itself has a tremendous amount of data and I'm curious where they get it. So,
What's involved in.
Yeah. 100%. So the press for Vermont wine right now is kind of on fire. It's been, I mean, all three of us have been featured, especially Deirdre most recently in the New York Times with the article at the bottom there, with how the most delicious wines stay true to themselves. But Travel and Leisure, Vermont is the New England's natural wine destination, now aspiring a really renowned wine writer to retrospective on a number of producers in the state and numerous posts on her webpage. And then the manual just published is The Future of American Wine, Vermont. All of this is super flattering and sort of, I think one of my concerns anyway, and we've chatted about this to some extent, is how far we're getting the horse before the cart when we only have 170 acres planted. And we only make, you know, on the high side, I think Shelburne's at 3,000 pieces.
I think they're like close to 6,000.
Are they now?
I think they're 8.
Yeah, they might be, like it was 6 a
Well,
couple
with
years
that, with
ago.
Lincoln Peak.
They also buy some juice from the Finger Lakes. So this is Shelburne Vineyard. They're the biggest.
They are the largest.
They are the largest.
Yeah.
And they just got larger.
And they just,
They just joined with Eden Ciders.
Right. Again, it's sort of a question of, okay, we've got all this amazing press, and now people are asking for the wines, but we don't have much wine to actually give them. And I think we'll probably want to come back to, that's a little bit of a lag. I'm on the next slide, but
Winery, whose space is that? Whose vineyard? It's beautiful.
isn't that gorgeous? And that's Blue,
Very beautiful too.
Camila's
Yeah,
Vineyard
that's
Dog.
the assistant wine grower, who's a young winemaker with her own label
Oh,
as
really?
well. Yeah.
Do all of us have wineries in our district or not? I know I do, you do.
Is,
I'm not sure.
What's in Bennington?
I'm trying to think. I'm not sure there's anything active down there.
No.
There used to be.
No Rutland wineries out there.
Yes.
But I don't think
Do you have any up in the Northeast Kingdom?
We do,
Yes,
Northeast
yes.
Kingdom Vineyards, actually,
Yes.
which is the
Yeah.
Hill family.
Yeah.
They're in, oh gosh,
I'm not sure exactly
where
where.
the vineyard is.
Is it not green, is it Greensboro?
It might be green. it
Near
might be there right
Near
there.
Greensboro, I
Near
believe. They just planted, they're not fully mature yet, but they planted like 4 acres or at least.
There's there's a brewer
Yeah,
who is
take
also
off.
planting vines in the Northeast Kingdom, Wunderkammer.
And what about, Due North? Isn't he Northeast Kingdom? Like Eric Marn? He might be up, I think Eric Marn of Due North might be up there.
What about Rutland County?
I'm not sure about Rutland County. There are some vineyards down in southern Vermont that we have not. I wonder if the group that makes Putney.
Says-
Okay.
It says Northeast Kingdom Vineyards is in St. Johnsbury.
St. Johnsbury. Okay.
Oh, huh.
I haven't run into. So, have you ever advertised like at Eastern States or through the ag agency down there, had a booth or anything, the association?
No, we haven't. Again, we have been pretty inactive for the last 5 years or so, and that's been put on my radar, but it's not something that we've done yet.
But I think that Shelburne has gone down.
Maybe
I think
they have.
Individual wineries have gone down
Right.
to have tables there, but as the council, we haven't done a table.
We're back. So, a lot of what we have planted in the state, in fact, 99% of what's planted here are sort of more modern hybrid varieties. So grapes that have been developed either at Cornell, University of Minnesota, a couple other places to survive in our extreme cold, which is really the big challenge. We have a short growing season for grapes, but the bigger issue is that the temperature drops below 20 degrees below zero, which is pretty deadly for a lot of what people would consider sort of traditional winemaking grapes. And so the hybrid varieties that are crosses of the Vitis vinifera, which is kind of the Pinot Noir Chardonnays of the world, with numerous other sort of Vitis species, a lot of which are native grapes to either this area or to the US, and many of which have kind of been cultivated over an extended period of time, are both cold, hardy, and much more resistant to the diseases that we have present here. So having worked in the wine industry for a long time, I was in the restaurant side of things for a while, and then, judging wine competitions and things like that, having tasted hybrid varieties for a long time from all over the US, we're in kind of the golden era of hybrid grape varieties with respect. Really, I think over the past 20 years, they've come up tremendous ways with respect to flavor profile and the quality of the wines that are possible at this point. This is Kendra's vineyard,
Oh, they can't see it yet.
Oh, wow.
This is the
and
way.
it will be there shortly.
The majority of the wine are combo sweet and dry, or?
Yeah, a lot of what's being produced now is on the dry side of the spectrum. Where we started, definitely, when Dave Boyden and Snow Farm and, a little bit after them, Shelburne really started, the focus was definitely on sweeter wines and on the tourist industry that kind of looks for those. And I think what we're seeing now is a real resurgence and a desire for more kind of European style dry wines.
So I think that's like this kind of second wave of winemakers in Vermont. So I mean, hybrid varieties, they're new. They're very new to the world. No one really knew/knows the best way to make wine from these fairly new varieties. And so I think the earlier winemakers definitely tried to, what do you do when you don't know how to do something? You look to what's been done before and try to adopt more vinifera styles of winemaking. And I think the difference with what's happening now is that we're trying to let these grapes show their true colors. So they're very high in acid. So instead of adding sugar to balance out that acid, we're making more sparkling wines that are dry. And they're like David said, more old world and really surprising customers. It's been, I think all of us have had the experience. And I would say that Deirdre has been kind of the leader in this whole second resurgence of our grapes, and I'm gonna let her speak to it. But yeah, they're definitely a dry, old world style, not kind of sweet and what you might think of as East Coast wine.
So you're getting more demand than you have supply.
Yeah, so the bottom point and there's Kendra's vineyard, or part of it anyway, with the old barn. Yeah, is sort of the why Vermont and why now question, which I think is the most important one, is that we really, with that press and the fact that Deirdre's wines are being tasted internationally, Kendra and Deirdre's both nationally, mine are sort of getting there. We've got New Hampshire and California right now, but there are people clamoring for the wines, and so the requests are coming from New York, some of the southern states, Texas, Chicago, San Francisco. How do we get more of your wine? And the challenge is we don't have that much wine. So the demand is certainly there. challenges we'll come to in a second as far as how do we increase that supply, because grapes take a little bit longer to establish. We can't go and spread corn and have corn this year. It's really a 3 to 5 year process to begin seeing anything from those vines. So that's one of the challenges. But I think also the national and international palate for wine has changed pretty dramatically. And to your point about sweet wines, I mean, what we're seeing right now coming to our tasting room up in Jeffersonville, for example, is people looking for wines that are grown sustainably and thoughtfully, and they're looking for higher acid, leaner, more sort of, I don't know what we would consider a very old school style of wine production.
I was gonna say, wine as food, as opposed to wine as an extra. You know, wine as a commodity has always been part of food and part of the table. And I think that where the wine industry in America is now is that people want to enjoy wine with their food. So wines that are higher in acid, drier in style, tend to go with food better than sweeter wines, which are nice to have after your meal or a little bit before. So I think that that's been part of that, you know, as people get more interested in understanding getting more interested in food and food culture, where their food is coming from, how their food is grown. As a consequence, wine is, people are starting to get interested in that as well. It's like, oh, I'm putting wine in my body too. Where does that come from? And it's not a discussion that's been as prevalent as a discussion about food, but it is happening, and it's all, you know, all these things are tied together culturally.
The idea of the farm to table movement is very much moving into the beverage sector, I think, in an important way.
Yeah.
So my question before was kind of after looking at kind of the yield and what revenue on a 10-acre vineyard looks like, to give kind of perspective to the potential for growth in the state. This is I would say a relatively conservative perspective. You know, I was chatting with Chris Grandstrom, who started Lincoln Peak vineyard, which has recently sold to Shelburne, and his financial, I mean, he was yielding 8 tons per acre and farming very differently than we do. So this is definitely a more conservative slash definitely a lower cropping perspective on vineyard production. That's Shelburne in the background there. But at full production, so 5 years in, a vineyard can yield roughly 2 tons per acre, sometimes lower, sometimes higher, depending on any given vintage. 20 tons of grapes equals about 3,000 gallons of juice, which is equivalent to about 1,250 cases of wine. Now, if you sell all of that for $20, and that's balancing, say, your retail price is a little bit higher than that, but your wholesale price is a little bit lower. Let's say you split the difference at $20 a bottle. That's about $300,000 in revenue annually from that vineyard of 10 acres. If you're able to sell that in a tasting room, putting it into wine flights, then that increases substantially, because you're charging for a flight of wine, which is 1.5 ounces or 2 ounces of each wine. And you've got people coming in and buying that at a much higher price than potentially your retail price for that bottle. That goes to $500,000 or even more with full glass pours, which are sort of the most, I guess you get your best margin on that. So the potential for, as a crop, is pretty substantial, I think, with comparison to many of the other crops that we focus on in the state.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm curious, this committee deals a lot with supply and demand in milk. And unfortunately for many of the farmers in Vermont, the demand does not outweigh the source. So I'm wondering if you got to a point where you could sort of control the supply and demand, you can sort of figure out the price as well. I assume if the demand right now exceeds the supply, that the prices are pretty high.
Prices
Have
very
you
high.
looked ahead to find sort of that sweet spot?
Yeah. So, and I've crunched these numbers a lot because we all talk a lot about scalability and when does it stop being a boutique Vermont
Right.
handmade product, and when does it start becoming a commodity? And but I think we have a long way to go, and the demand still is pushing prices into a place where I'd say the average price for a bottle of Vermont wine is between $30 and $40 right now on the shelf. If it's thoughtfully grown and made, and there are certainly lower priced options. But as soon as we take that and you scale it to, okay, everybody's making 5,000 cases of wine, which is many years in the future, then everybody is looking at needing to take that wine and sell it outside the state, where you're making about 50% what you would make selling it yourself in the state. That said, when you start to scale, the scale of economy helps you tremendously. And right now, a Vermont wine hitting the shelf still at $25, and the producer making $10 on that bottle as it leaves the state, still makes it a super viable crop. It's definitely, and I've got another slide kind of chatting about this moving forward, but we are 100% a value-added product, right? In much the way if you're raising cows and you're making boutique beautiful cheese at Jasper Hill or Parish Hill Creamery, obviously that's a huge part of it. I think we're a long way from outstripping demand, as we only have 170 acres. If we doubled our acreage in the state, we still could not meet the demand, right? Just for Vermont wine. And we could probably not change pricing dramatically, because I know that people are asking for all of our wines right now, and we do not have enough wine to sell them. And that's pretty much everybody in the city currently.
Good place to be. I
It
agree.
is. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
I wondered if you have sort of outreach to farmers to encourage new vineyards to be created, because we're looking to have people diversify, and just as we've got people sugar making on their farm to make ends meet, and I don't know about the latest maple production, but I don't see people starving who are putting out syrup. They're finding markets for that. So I'm thinking if everybody had 5 acres and grapes, maybe
100. So
I don't know. Anyway,
that thought.
You tell me.
we're going to come back to that.
Okay.
If you don't
Okay.
mind, William.
Yeah,
because
yeah, no.
Because this has been, I actually have,
I'll let you get it.
many thoughts on that. So this is kind of some of the developments that are happening right now that are positive. There is slow vineyard development. How many acres are you putting in?
I have 10 and a half, and I'm putting in another 4.
And are you planting right now?
We're always planting a little bit. We do a lot of experimental work, so yes,
And
Not
Stephen, so actually I should have, I've been meaning to catch up with him. There's a gentleman who has a company called Vermont Vineyards, and he plants for mostly hobbyists who also putting in vineyards, and he's got more work than he can handle currently for his company. The national and international presence, I mean, this is always fun. I'm having worked in the restaurant industry and the wine industry for a long time. I've traveled and tasted internationally, and now I'm seeing colleagues of mine writing about Deirdre's wines in France and saying, hey, do you know this La Garagista wine? Yeah, I got it. I know that person. And so it's really fun to see the expansion. It's gradual, but it's coming. Our wines are in a couple restaurants in California, and I'm seeing, I saw Kendra's wines on the shelf at a retailer in New York. And I was like, oh, all right. There's also been a push from Ken Albert, who I reached out to Ken. I know he's super busy at the winery right now over at Shelburne, who's founded Shelburne. And this is really thanks to Ken's hard work that the Champlain Valley AVA is in progress and should come online soon. American viticultural areas are basically defined regions of production within any given state. Vermont does not have one as of yet. We're just Vermont. That's all we can put legally on a label. Whereas even New York has a handful in the Finger Lakes and numerous, down in Long Island. And so these are, whether they help, I think they do help as far as just getting the Vermont name out there. The Champlain Valley AVA has been a work in progress for some time, and we should see it come online in the next couple of years. It's defined by both geography and to some extent climate, geology as well, sort of pointing out where that perimeter is that encompasses the Champlain Valley, and grapes grown there just taste different and make different wines than those grown elsewhere. So that should, in theory, be coming online very soon, and which means that like Deirdre has vineyards down there, so some of her wines could actually say Champlain Valley as opposed to just Vermont.
Is there something about the soils there or the climate or
yes.
both?
Both. And
Yes.
Yes, so Vermont has the oldest geology on the planet. So when people talk about wine, everybody talks about Burgundy, right? In France, Burgundy is amazing, it's wonderful, it has really old soil, old bedrock geology. Ours is about twice the age of Burgundy. So Burgundy doesn't have any.
Yeah.
So, our soils particularly, I mean, all throughout Vermont are really, really, really special within the wine community. And that's something that we're just starting to really be able to investigate as more wineries are cropping up in different locations. So the predominant number of wineries is in the Champlain Valley at the moment. But we also have, our other two vineyards up in the Chattahoochee Forest. That's all volcanic soils. Where Kendra's on the islands, which is on the oldest.
Second oldest limestone in the world.
Yeah,
Very,
phosphorus rock.
very shallow bedrock. And, I think what's really neat, going to Deirdre's point, we've created this AVA, which encompasses the Champlain Valley Basin. But what's, I think, really interesting is how varied the geology is throughout the entire state, even within the AVA. So there are like sub AVAs that get created, like in California, in Napa, there's, an AVA, and then there's broken out into little pieces based on specific features of the geology and the climate. I think that's going to ultimately probably happen here. Because up in the Lake Champlain Islands, it's a little bit different than down by Shelburne. And so it's kind of exciting with how much variability we have. And
one of the aspects.
How long has your vineyard been around?
So it's one of the older vineyards in the state.
Okay.
So there was this kind of first wave in the late 90s. And so like Boyden and Snow Farm were planted, and then Shelburne, Lincoln Peak. And then our vineyard was planted by Bob and Linda Livingstone. It used to be East Shore Vineyard. So it was planted in the early 2000s. So it is one of the older.
And one of the things about the AVA, which is also, I think, exciting, is that usually when you get the first AVA, it's much easier to get the follow-up AVA. So we might see Champlain Valley followed by Champlain Islands, followed by a Northeast Kingdom AVA, all of which kind of puts us on the map, literally, for people who are looking at Vermont as a grape growing region that's a little more serious. As a value-added product, we chatted about this. This is another one of Deirdre's vineyards here, looking out over the lake. So perfect example following the AVA conversation. But we actually sold our grapes in 2021, and at one of the more reasonable prices for grapes in the state. We didn't have a great place to produce, and when I talked to colleagues of mine who grow grapes in Oregon and New York and stuff, they're like, "Oh, how much are you selling, per pound?" I was like, "Well, we're selling $1.50 a pound of grapes." They're like, "That's what I sell Pinot Noir in Oregon for you." You've got to be kidding me that you're selling hybrid grape varieties grown in Vermont for the same price that we're getting in one of the top locations in the world.
I'm gonna just interject here. I don't necessarily think this is correct, but I also know from Stephen that people from out of state this past year were looking to buy fruit for as much as $5 a pound from Vermont.
That's like Napa Valley Cabernet
Yeah,
prices.
They specifically wanted Vermont grown fruit. So, I think that's,
Right.
it's interesting.
So cool. Oh my God.
Yeah, right.
Man, I really undersold us. Anyway,
Next year.
but, yeah.
Reasonable, maybe.
Actually, the wine, will just grow the.
Grow the grapes.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
which in most other regions is not super viable, just growing the grapes,
Yeah.
because the infrastructure required, unless you're growing a lot of grapes, is challenging. But at those prices, yeah, do it.
But we're such foodies here.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's true. And so obviously the viability increases as the value added product. But then one of the other aspects that I think is important is that of the many beverages, and obviously we're very famous for beer and for cider, we're one of the few that is actually a fully Vermont agricultural product. For those of us that are making our wines exclusively with Vermont grapes, we are almost all of us, and we were chatting about this yesterday, almost all of us who produce wine are actually growing the grapes as well. Part of it's because nobody else has grapes to sell. But that means that we're all farming as well as producing the wine, which is a very sort of old Burgundian model of production, which you can kind of start a winery in California pretty easily by starting the winery, using somebody else's winery facility and buying grapes from someone else. You can just start a name, basically. Here, we're insulating our barns and finding vineyards and planting them, or
And it is also what makes us unique in wine, that we are doing both the farming and
That
the
doesn't
production.
happen.
Not,
Not
not
every-
everywhere,
not in most places,
not in
actually.
America, not in America. In Europe, yes, that's the model. But California, it's our colleagues, most of our colleagues in California are buying fruit. They divide, the farmers from the winemakers, and it makes us very unique that we can do it.
We're all kind of the philosophy that the wine is grown in the vineyard. So if you have good fruit, it's easy to make good wine. And so that model, I think, makes us really unique and may be part of the reason that we've had the success that we've had. I think it's something, as we grow, we need more grapes, we need acres and acres of more grapes, but we also don't want to lose sight of this unique model that is more kind of old world European model.
How many acres of grapes does it take to run a decent winery? I mean, how,
That's it's a good question. It depends on your intentions with the winery and how, and this is a conversation, I actually work with somebody at the Farm and Forest Viability, Sam over at Intervale, frequently discussing kind of how we intend to scale our business. And the question is really like, you can do everything. Like right now, most of us farm, make the wine, bottle it, label it, and self-distribute it, and drive, and we're the delivery driver. Now that's fine when you make like 500 cases of wine. I'd like to not do at least a couple of those things in the future. Like maybe I'd be able to hire somebody to deliver the wine and maybe label it and, some of those other things. So we can do that on, we can kind of do everything with 5 to 6 acres. When you get to 10 acres, you're still doing everything.
Yeah, so I have 10.5 acres, and right now I have 2 full-time employees. My husband and I are unpaid employees still. And that, like, the fact that we have 2 full-time, this is the first time we've ever had 2 full-time employees, which is kind of like a big deal for us. But I'm gonna go deliver wine after this. Like, we are doing a lot, and I'm similar to Deirdre in size. Like, we produce about 1,200 cases a year. We've scaled up to that in the last 3 years.
So it really depends on your intentions, I guess, if you want to have a fully hired staff like Shelburne style, then you have to be farming 15 to 20 acres.
You're like at 25 now, I
You're at
think.
20. As you mentioned, 5,000 cases.
Yeah.
Some goal that, in giving your numbers, that's 40 acres. So that seems like way out there, but.
Yeah, I mean,
You can produce, but that's also cropping low and farming certainly organically, and at 1 to 2 acres, at 1 to 2 tons per acre, that's pretty low yielding. When you're looking at somewhere like Chris Granstrom, he and I were looking at numbers, he was planting on strawberry fields that were super fertile and farming pretty conventionally. And he was cropping, I think, 8 tons per acre. So 4 times what those numbers were. So, and it varies tremendously based on soil, which actually is one of the benefits of what we do. And it's on my slide, in fact. And this is a conversation I had with the land trust when we were looking for somewhere to buy, because property has not been easy to find, as everyone knows in the past few years. But one of the conversations with the land trust was that we're looking for land to plant grapes. That does not have to be prime farmland, right? It doesn't have to be considered prime ag land. And that's one of the things that it's a hard conversation to have, because grapes are not really a crop that is well known in the state. And so there isn't a lot of desire from the land trust to subsidize less than prime ag land for planting a crop. But we actually do pretty well on less successful soils. It's one of the, perhaps, it's kind of a little bit of a myth that grapes really always want to be on poor soils. They can kind of do well almost anywhere you plant them. They're a weed. But how that grows, if they're struggling, they actually produce less fruit, which is and more concentrated and high quality at times. Right?
So you don't need to be on river bottom land, but yet up in the Champlain Valley, they like being near the lake, or is it the soil types at the land there that's really beneficial?
It's the geology below the topsoil and the clay is that limestone and shale, that because the grapes roots go down quite deep, so they grab into that and that brings certain elements. And in terms of like where one of our vineyards is in West Addison, it's such heavy clay that it's actually really terrible for other kinds of annual crops. So not all of Champlain Valley is great for annual growing crops, but
Well, and
but it can be good for livestock.
yeah, and to your comment about the lake, so the lake is extremely valuable because of our climate, so it makes the environment more temperate. So, we are directly on the lake. I think you saw that picture. So we don't have to worry about early spring and late fall frosts, where other places, even close to the lake, do. It just moderates the temperature more and allows the growing season to be a little bit longer. Yeah.
And so, to your point, and this becomes an interesting conversation because grapes are such a long-term crop. Talking with farmers who have land that isn't useful, it was funny. I was presenting to the House Ag Committee during the Tourism Day a few weeks ago, and with the folks from Cabot who said, "Hey, hold on, wait a second. We've got a bunch of land that we are not using for anything." And they started looking at the numbers. It's like, can we plant grapes? And it's possible. And I think having a symbiotic relationship with a lot of the other agriculture in the state could be really wonderful. The challenge is the grapes we don't get any yield from it for 3 to 5 years. And then you're saying, okay, if we're going to plant and nurture and care for these vines, are we leasing this for 20 years, 30 years, or are you selling us the grapes? I mean, there's just a lot of intricacy to that relationship, which it's not to say that it's not viable, because it totally is. It's just a matter of working out that relationship. Are you planting grapes and selling them to us, which is great, or are we planting the grapes on your land and working out some sort of long-term lease? There's a lot of ways to sort of skin that proverbial cat, but there's a lot of potential. There's an interesting farm in California called Piscinas Ranch that is doing a whole lot of research on carbon sequestering, and I know this is a hot topic, obviously, as our climate continues to change, and none of us really do much tilling in our vineyards. Untilled land has been proven pretty much to be one of the greatest resources we have for carbon sequestration on the planet. And so this is actually a huge benefit of what we're doing also with respect to regenerative agriculture. And speaking of that, there's also a lot of multi-use possibilities. Deirdre, I know, has sheep in her vineyards through a lot of the summer. And Kendra has how many sheep now?
24.
These are her sheep, in fact. And so there's a lot of multi-use possibilities. Sheep are wonderful in the vineyard. They fertilize.
How's the fencing, like, I think I can see a fence there in the back of,
Yeah.
is that an issue?
It is a demand on labor, and I'm actually hopefully gonna get a grant soon to help with improving our fencing situation, but we use the electric netting, which is movable fencing, and we basically rotationally graze the sheep in and out of the vines, depending on where we are in the growing season and what our needs are. So we do, even though we farm organically, we're not certified. That's another whole discussion, but we do spray. We do biodynamic tea-based sprays, which we all adopted from Deirdre. And sometimes we spray very micro doses of copper, which is an organic spray, and sheep are very sensitive to copper. So we sometimes have to rotate the sheep out of the vineyard. In the last couple of years, we've been grazing them in a field that we're planting this spring to fertilize that. But they're really amazing. They are, instant benefit is the mowing. So we've decreased our fossil fuels significantly in the last couple of years with their mowing. But the real reason we have them is for their fertilization from a long-term perspective. We feel very strongly about kind of integrating different types of agriculture together to create a more healthier, vibrant ecosystem. So that's why we've incorporated the sheep.
That's why I asked about the fence, is we're proposing a pilot program that's gone down to appropriations to get money for electronic fencing.
Neat.
So you could do it right from your phone.
So
Yeah.
Moving to-
I can't- So I didn't tell you guys before, but our winery's in Stowe. We live in Grand Isle in the summer, but we were settled in Stowe before we kind of went on this journey. So our winery's out of our basement in Stowe. So I can't tell you when the forage quality goes down after harvest and we're back in Stowe and commuting, how many times I've gotten a call from my neighbor, your sheep are out again. And I'm like, I'm gonna drive an hour.
This rig, I think you could set it right from Rhode Island. You could move your fence.
Oh,
It's
wow.
called No Fence. There are 40,000 animals in Britain and Norway. And the No Fence is a collar and both cattle, sheep, and goats. And you can
You just
literally-
set it like electronically.
So hold off.
3 feet,
Satellite, yeah.
3 feet from where they get a shot, they hear a noise, most often music, and it's really.
Now, hold on.
Try
We're-
that, and if it
That would
works,
be
then
amazing.
another-
Yeah.
Now,
No, I mean,
We're currently training our border collie to herd. Is this gonna make that
no, I mean,
obsolete?
that, I mean, so being a veterinarian, I've fully kind of embraced this sheep integration into our business, which I'm figuring out. We lamb in the winter and it's been great, but the question I'm always asked my husband and I are like, is this viable? Like, is this, there's a lot, it costs us a lot in labor and, but I also think it's the right way to farm and,
The other neat thing about this is that your animals get out because it's not a fence. They only get shocked if they go outside the perimeter, as you said. And most herd animals want to be back with the herd.
Yes.
And the problem is, once they get out, you have to go back and let them back in.
Mhm.
And they can go from outside
outside.
back in. It's,
That's really
you
cool.
you should Google, it's
I
No
will.
Fence.
Okay,
They're,
They're all
as
over
of-
Europe, yeah.
As of this summer in August, they will send their first.
brilliant. I mean, fencing is so expensive.
It's like, oh, baby, this is.
That would be life changing.
Yeah.
Well, if we can certainly help test that out. If you need it.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the great things about working with sheep and doing rotational grazing is, it's like wonderful if you're a veterinarian and you know how to care for sheep and you love large animals. But it's also a great opportunity for vineyards to collaborate with livestock farmers, which is that's how we do it. We work with another young farmer who brings his sheep on and rotates through all of our vineyards. And that actually all of these ideas came out of Piscinas Ranch, which David was talking about, who's doing all this research on rotational grazing and carbon sequestration. So there are a lot of diversified opportunities, I think, that we can continue as a wine growing community to work with other farmers, whether it's leasing land or buying fruit or working with livestock or. So.
And
Thank
obviously
you for
there's-
sharing that.
Yeah. we're really
Very excited.
Obviously the money for the economy from the product itself, but then agro-tourism is huge. So vineyards are always a draw for people to go, especially in the summer here, after you finish a hike, go down, tour a vineyard, do a tasting. And the potential development for otherwise unused land, which as we know has become, the reforestation of Vermont has been rampant. And so this gives us an opportunity to use land that might otherwise just be reclaimed by the forest. And the job development aspect is massive here. This is part of one of the conversations I have a lot with a colleague of mine down in the Finger Lakes, and going to get to this in a second about infrastructure, but it's just, I talked to him and it's like, hey, how's your vineyard? When are you pruning? And he's like, well, we haven't started, but I can get my vineyard pruned in 3 days because I get a group of folks out there and there's just a labor force that already knows how to prune. He can prune 17 acres that he farms in 3 days. And we've pruned all winter to get where we are. So we're not at a place where we have enough vineyards to actually keep people employed in any sort of pattern, or but in every other community where grapes are grown, there is a migratory workforce that find a lot of work there. So With respect to climate change, this is always a question right now, and a lot of the grant money is kind of focused on this, but the hybrid varieties are kind of, this is in many respects a solution for climate change in many ways. They are built to adapt and are actually extremely adaptable as they're created. So as the climate warms, as it changes, as it's snowing right now, I mean, as we don't really know what's going to happen working with the varieties that we do right now, there's very little that I can foresee happening immediately in the future that would make them less viable. Honestly, everything seems to sort of point in our favor. And we've talked about this a lot. I mean, people are looking at hybrids in California, they're looking at them in France, they're looking at a lot of the grape varieties that have been kind of cast aside in the past as ways to combat the climate change issues that they're seeing. And we're seeing, I mean, every vineyard in France has had some issue in the past 3 years, whether it be frost, hail, fires. I mean, fires out west, there's a lot of challenges. So we're kind of positioned very well right now to be resilient and versatile as the climate continues to change.
So, but as a winemaker, would you, any of you, the three of you or your other colleagues, want to buy grapes that are produced at a different vineyard and bring them home to run through as your grapes to run through as in your winery?
So,
I mean, is there
from
an
outside the
outside,
state, or-
should we encourage outside people to grow the grapes for you, the winemakers, like they are out west, or? is that
outside the state, or just
No.
within the state?
Oh,
Yeah, no, I think absolutely, I think so.
I have a project called Field Studies, which is working with other farmers who have vineyards in locations other than ours. So we have somebody who planted a vineyard for us down in Brattleboro. And we make 3 wines from that vineyard. So he grows the fruit. He and I have collaborated on what the farming should be. He delivers the fruit to me, and we incorporate that into we don't blend it with the wines that come from the acreage that we farm, but it is another project that we do. So I would be interested, I think all of us potentially would be interested.
So I think what I heard you say is when I go to the Willamette Valley and we went around to all the wineries that are on their vineyards, most of those, all of those wineries are importing grapes from other people onto their farms and
It varies tremendously.
Right.
So there are hundreds upon hundreds of wineries in Oregon. If you're visiting Oregon, frequently you're at a tasting room on someone's property that they frequently farm. But that's probably 25% of the production. As far as like when you see Oregon wine on the shelf here, I would say 75% of that is produced by somebody from somebody else's farm grapes.
So if I'm sitting at a picnic table at Erith, it's probably their wine at the picnic table and but what they ship out is probably might be.
It could be
It
both.
varies,
could
it
be
varies a
both
lot.
Because, and then we sort of get into the discussion of the AVA, the cultural areas. So you can, as a winemaker, you can work with another farmer who's growing really beautiful fruit that is highly respected. And you develop a collaborative relationship with that farmer. And you make the wine, and that wine can be just as sought after as the wine that you make from your own estate. But there are certainly models where there are people growing fruit that are not looking for quality, and the winemaker is looking for a value product that they want to get on the shelf for a lower price. There's that dynamic that happens also.
Let me give you an example. So if you go to the grocery store and find A to Z Pinot Noir, A to Z Pinot Noir, at least in the past, was made predominantly from fruit grown in the Umpqua Valley in the south. right? Nowhere near Willamette. It's produced at a winery in Willamette, which is actually where they produce a few other wines that go under different labels and sell for $50, $60 a bottle at the winery. So you could be sitting in their vineyard looking at this massive winemaking facility. Gallon upon, like millions of gallons of that are coming from the southern part of Oregon, are being bottled there and sent out and labeled Oregon and hitting the shelf here, there, New York, wherever. Meanwhile, they make 200 cases of their own vineyard, production. And so you might be sitting at that picnic table drinking a really great bottle that you spent $60 there to drink, and it's amazing, and it's made from the vines you can see. Meanwhile, the winery behind you is cranking someone else's juice. So, but which actually is a great segue to some of our infrastructural challenges in Vermont right now, which, well, I'll start at the top, but we'll get to it. Establishing a vineyard is expensive. That's one of the big barriers to entry. So getting the vines themselves can be expensive. That's not the largest expense. Once you start figuring out trellising and preparing the land itself, there's a lot of upfront cost. And when you're talking about whether somebody's just looking to invest in it or taking out a loan, it's having the conversation that this isn't going to actually become cash positive for 5 years, because that's the nature of growing grapes. It's a harder conversation than put some hay in there, you'll get your hay at the end of the season, right? So that timeline is a little bit challenging, and we don't have lenders that understand that here in the way that if we were in California or Oregon or Washington, where it's a cranking business. There's also the fact that there's a distinct lack of infrastructure. If my destemmer breaks during harvest, these guys are using theirs. There's no, it's not like, and I talk to colleagues of mine, and it's like, so what happens when this, what happens when your press breaks? He's like, I go down the road and rent one, or I go across the street and borrow one. We don't have any of that infrastructure right now because we're such a small business. And the same goes for co-packing and production space. A lot of the grapes that are farmed in Oregon and California, a lot of those labels, somebody might actually farm the grapes, but then make the wine at somebody else's facility. So they go in, use all their equipment, pay them a set fee, somebody oversees it, and then they can walk out of there and be done. Bottling lines, we bottle most of us by hand. We've got tiny little bottling lines. Somebody in California can show up with a truck. They bottle 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 cases in a day. You pay them, they go away, you're done. We just have none of that infrastructure. And so that increases the challenges with respect to when you're starting your winery. A lot of it is upfront equipment costs. So a lot of us bootstrap that. And in fact, almost all of us, certainly those of us in the room, have bootstrapped our way into the business, which is fine. But as we look to scale, which I think is the important conversation, is how do we get to a critical mass?
Yeah.
Then we get to a place where we can either have
we have automation and automated equipment.
Yeah, and then your cost goes down so rapidly, but very few of us have the quantity to justify some of that automation. Limited trained labor, this is one of the big challenges. I can hire a bunch of people to come out to the field and help me prune, but I'm gonna have to work with each one of them individually for an entire week before I feel comfortable with them pruning, whereas it's a lot of trained labor, what we do. And we're also in an evolving viticultural area. So a lot of what we're farming, a lot of the ways we're farming are taken from other places, and then we're sort of fitting them to our unique climate and place and grapes. And so I would consider that an opportunity as well as a challenge, that we're kind of looking at how this is going to evolve as we get more familiar with these grapes in our places. So some ideas for growth. And this is sort of the beginning of this conversation. Obviously, there is grant money for agriculture in the state. A lot of those, and I know, we've all looked at a lot of that grant money. A lot of them are shaped to go to other forms of agriculture. And so a lot of times it's hard for grape growing to sort of be shoehorned into a grant that's built for apple orchards or dairy or fill in the blank. You can see it, I have it on the slide. Collaboration with existing farms is definitely something that we are looking at, and I have a meeting tomorrow with somebody who has a bunch of land right next to us that wants vineyards, and we want to discuss it. One of the interesting models is New Mexico. New Mexico has 400 years of history growing grapes, but not super successfully. And they just rolled out the 2022 Vineyard Restoration Fund, which was, the argument was made, $1 million today for planting, and that will get you $10 million in taxes paid out over the next 10 years. And a lot of that, all of that money is going into infrastructural development, so planting of vineyards. And they found that wildly successful. They've gone from a couple hundred wineries to many, many more, and the tax dollars are beginning to, I mean, 2022 is yesterday, right? But they've already seen a huge uptick in vineyard plantings, and their tourism industry is already increasing. So, and this is New Mexico. So not exactly what people would consider a huge agro-tourism location necessarily. But I think here we're in a very unique place that we have a wine culture that's actually super old when you look at, I mean, Samuel Lee Champlain talked about how successful vines were that grew here. And then it's brand new in the sense that commercial wineries here started in the 90s with Dave Boyden and Snow Farm really were the first ones that planted to produce commercially. And I think, you know, the important part, I think, is that agriculture is really the backbone of what we do in Vermont, is the cultural landscape. And I think we have opportunities with viticulture to keep that tradition progressive and exciting without really changing the ethos of what we do. And I think looking at a very sort of a forward and progressive perspective on agriculture, the focus on regenerative agriculture, organic farming, no-till viticulture, all of this is kind of in line, I would argue, with what our current environmental and social goals are in Vermont, at least as from those of us outside the state office. It seems like that's a strong focus inside the State House, and it's important to us. It's a lot of what we do, the philosophy of the thing. So
Thank you.
that's what we got. That was my presentation. Happy to answer any questions. I know we've kind of talked through some of this.
So have any of you or your members tried working lands or any of those programs to get money?
I have not yet applied for, I got a USDA value added producer grant, which has been incredibly helpful. It's about to finish in another 6 months or so, but it's allowed us to operate. It's allowed us to really get out there. But, you know, I think one of the challenges that I'm faced with, that we are faced with right now, it's just like I'm, you know, I'm aware of these grants, but I don't have the manpower to get them done. Like that's what I've been struggling with. The fence grant I've been looking at for like 2 years, and I just, you know, because we're selling wine, making wine, growing grapes, raising sheep, and there's 3 kids too, but.
Fence great. He knows all about filling that one. How long did it take?
Process.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know why they have to make such a complicated act process. I mean,
It makes it challenging.
keep it simple. I mean, Jesus.
In the working lands also, there's some of the requirements, we don't meet some of the requirements yet as far as the duration of our business. And we also lease our vineyard, which is a challenge as well.
Yeah.
I find that a lot of the grants are also set up for marketing, which is great, but a lot of us are at a place where we need to be adding infrastructure, either building onto our wineries or planting more vineyards. And most of the grants that I've looked at don't help us in that way.
Yeah, you applied for working lands, didn't you?
I did a long time ago.
You know, when
And
the-
they weren't too sure that grapes were viable in Vermont at the time. So,
would vineyards gotta be classified as agriculture?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
so is there one or two particular areas of help that we could work on improving?
I think the planting aspect is the one that is, I mean, in my perspective anyway, like the infrastructure and the winery aspects, and those are things that I think we all need help with, and they will continue to evolve with time. But I think unless we start getting vines in the ground, then we are in a standstill as far as, well, we're just kind of in a cyclical process where we will continue to grow what we grow and hopefully grow better. But planting more vineyard land is the biggest challenge and the biggest holdup with respect to production right now. Most of us have capacity to scale a bit what we're doing.
I would say, I'm gonna add
Yeah.
to that, yes, definitely planting, but also winery space.
Winery space.
Because like right now, where we are, I can't produce more wine in my winery. We're busting out of the seams.
You just started making wine in our garage,
Yeah, a 12 by.
and I make it in my basement.
And we have a winery, but it's, we've now grown to an extent where I'm at that juncture of, I would like more fruit, I need to plant more or work with another farmer to plant more, but I can't process it in the location that I am. So the two kind of go together.
I think, yeah, I would agree that, help building wineries, infrastructure. And then also we need more vines.
Which in the winery aspect, equipment aside, our needs are not massive. It's hot water and floor drains, which is basically every barn. Installation.
You need insulation.
So there's a lot of potential
Yeah.
for that as well.
Other question?
I don't recall all the places that I saw the articles listed, like New York Times seems to be broad population. Have you put things in like the Ag Agencies magazine to encourage farmers to be thinking about this yet? Like targeted your pitch or your publicity toward those people who might be like, oh, maybe I could do that because I have a person in my family who needs more work on the farm. I don't know that ever happened, but anyway, just a thought.
No, and again, part of the reason that we thought this meeting would be great is to get some ideas flowing because we are also limited in our resources and our thinking is also, and work, it's just making sure the vineyard's pruned, but also, we're such a baby industry in this state and there isn't that infrastructure, but the agricultural world in Vermont has tremendous infrastructure. And so it's knowing about things like that where we can begin the conversation. That's a huge part of it. And we haven't even put
Well,
down.
and I think part of the reason that our organization became more inactive is that, we're all like hamsters running around in the wheel because we are wearing too many hats. And I think part of the reason, the council has been reinvigorated is just because we're like, we've realized that it's going to continue to happen unless we build infrastructure that supports our ability to grow. And, we actually, we hosted an international cool climate grape conference. We had this opportunity to host that in Burlington this fall, which, we had people from Finland and Sweden and Denmark and all over Europe come to our small little state. Yeah, and it was really kind of, I think it lit the fire for us. I think one of many events that made us realize that we have such a potential for an industry, to be a real wine growing region here. But we need to work together and we need to work with you all. And that's kind of where we are. We're at this very baby starting point, but the reason we did this is to open the conversation and we really appreciate you guys meeting with us.
Yeah.
So,
Great.
Well, of course, we're on the tail end of a seasonal thing.
Yes.
This is a
But,
preemptive conversation.
well, it's a good, if you can't be on the front end, which
Start early.
you're better off on this end.
Yeah.
Because we'll get thinking about it for things to do on the off session plus the next session.
Exactly.
So
Now, we knew we were far behind the 8 ball for this session, but starting the conversation for the next one was really
yeah,
right.
Well,
We
there's
can do that now.
just so much education that needs to occur
Wow.
around Vermont wine. People's initial reactions are, Vermont wine, really? And I think, people actually, big wine drinkers are seeing, that are looking beyond Vermont are realizing more so than Vermonters, I think, are realizing what kind of wine we can produce in our state.
Yeah, probably you could sell every drop you make right in the ski areas during the ski season.
Yeah.
No, is dairying, we've lost cows for the last 3 or 4 years, cow numbers, but now we're losing pounds of milk. And, the small guys, they're begging to do something in ag, but they can't make a living with dairy, so if we had some help for them to switch over and they could sell their grapes to you folks.
I think the conversation with some of the Voc Tech schools as well would be really great, because I think, again, young farmers that are looking at their options, getting more and more limited, say, okay, come out and learn how to prune some vines with me.
Yeah, VTC and UVM, I gotta be,
Well, we have a wonderful leader at UVM, Terry Bradshaw, who's like the great guy. He's also mainly an Apple guy. But he's done amazing work for all of us, but he's one guy and he needs more, especially if we are going to, plant more vines and that, that's definitely, he's been our biggest cheerleader, but we need more support from an extension perspective. Like when we reach out to Cornell, they're really helpful, but we need that in our state.
yeah, you need.
So I put that as third. I learned up in Quebec, and I know you guys have to go, but they actually have, every vineyard is required by the state to have a agronomist that consults with them. So they have free educational consulting because they want, and Quebec wants the vineyards to succeed, which I thought was amazing. But yeah.
Well,
we look forward to continuing the conversation.
yeah, well, thanks a lot for
Thank you.
coming. And,
Yeah, of course, thank you.
We know how busy you are at this
Yeah.
time of the term, so
Yeah.
appreciate you